afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr with me, your host, Imperial Dane, Master of Propaganda Instruction and Teaching Stuff. We're off here to a Propagandacast Lehr covering something a bit more, well, abstract, that is timing and opportunity specifically, or well, I suppose to sum it up, why it's better to, in most cases, go for medium tank rather than wait for a big, heavy one. I mean, it's based sort of, result of all these just so many players, time and time again, for so many months, even years, just consistently, they have a chance to go for a medium tank, tier 3, and instead, what do? Oh, they just wait for a Tiger, Pershing, or IS-2. And again, it can have its advantages, but what people usually then, of course, sacrifice is, well, timing and opportunity. That is, again, usually this large amount of time then that passes between the time you can say bring up Panzer IV and then call in a Tiger. I mean, again, I'm using the Wehrmacht as an example, that they also do have a lot of timing and opportunity costs sort of built into their teching, again, with having to research and then build that rather actually uniquely gives them a lot of time cost as well, besides just resource costs. But that's sort of another story. Now, again, considering, again, folks, I'm right here at the 11-minute mark, I can actually soon get up medium armor. Again, I've been doing reasonably well though, but still usually within the 11 to say 13 to 14 minute mark. If you're doing so all right, you can usually at any site bring up medium armor. Again, for the Wehrmacht, it tends to be a bit later to timing, and again, just overall slightly bigger costs, particularly compared to the Allies. So again, for some of the Western ones, can just, they don't even have to do anything. They just build the structure and they built it, or order it and they just built it itself, which again also gives them some time advantages there. Of course, that's also another story, but again, usually around that time period, can usually bring up your medium tank. For a heavy tank, which is pretty much in most cases around 13 command points, the timing is usually 22 to 23 minutes, roughly. I mean, that's generally sort of the match has the usual intensity. If you have, as in which case the sort of command points will progress at that certain pace, and roughly around the 21-22 minute mark, you will be able to call in a heavy tank. Now, how much time is it between, again, 11, 12, 30 minutes and 21, 22, 23 minutes? If you're saying 10 minutes, bingo. And again, roughly 10 minutes is an awful lot of time of just, not bringing up a tank. And again, for example, in the case of the Wehrmacht, it's more or less the same cost of a single Panzer IV once you've teched and built the structures up for it, and getting the tank that is for calling in a Tiger. But in terms of timing, you can usually bring out your Panzer IV at least, well, almost 10 minutes soon out than your Tiger, and usually pressure your opponent sooner and hit them back faster. That's, for example, just an example. Again, you'll see it with the Allies. Again, they could, rush out some medium tanks, but in many cases, they'll just wait for the IS-2, wait for the Pershing, wait for the Churchill Crocodile, although that one's a bit rarer as of late, but still, in theory, again, they could push much harder sooner, but in many cases, they will just sit back. And for example, the Oberkommando West, again, they don't have command points, but again, the resource courses involved generally tend to be quite heavy for a King Tiger. And again, in those cases, that means holding up a lot of resources, and then, of course, just getting into it. And again, that usually means there's a lot of opportunity, lost a lot of opportunity to pressure your opponent. Again, also a lot of resources then doing nothing, which is also, again, another sort of cost, the opportunity cost, and also means basically, if your opponent again then goes for medium armor, he's got more resource on the field than you do. Well, again, you're holding one bit back, and again, while that might seem a great idea, if your opponent then has more resources than you on the field, he can then use those effectively to then crush your resources. Meaning, by the time you do bring up again the roughly amount of resource, then you bring up something bigger, you'll still be below him because, again, he was able to use timing and opportunity and resources to crush you. Now, again, gaining an advantage. Again, that's also opportunity. So when it comes to it, sitting about waiting for a heavy tank, is in many cases actually a pretty poor choice. I mean, in some cases it will be necessary because, well, you've got no option, which can happen as a Wehrmacht. You're just under so much pressure that by the time you can actually bring a medium tank, you might as well go for the Tiger. But again, if you're playing somewhat decent, and again, I've seen many players, have a good advantage and then squander it away by sitting just waiting for a heavy tank. And again, that's, what you're not supposed to do. I mean, to sort of use the sort of analogy or metaphor, whatever you like to call it. I mean, imagine that scene from Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, in the marketplace there, Indy's running after, Marion, who's just been kidnapped, huge guy swinging about his sword, Indy just pulls out the gun, shoots the man dead. And that's sort of basically it here again. Heavy tank is sort of huge, flashy guy with a sword. Medium tank is Indiana Jones pulling their gun and shooting him. And of course, just like in Raiders of, well, not the Temple of Doom, and okay, you might not just have the pistol again, And then, of course, Sword Guy wins. I mean, in most cases, if you know what you're doing, you will have the pistol, shoot him dead. And that's sort of the case here. I mean, if sort of, really want it simplified down, again, it's basically the difference between being big and flashy and just being practical and shooting the other guy dead. And that's usually sort of the difference in most cases a well-handled medium tank can represent against your opponent. Plus, that way, you can even bring up more because, again, there's sort of the other sort of downside just relying on call-ins and not preparing medium armor. When and or if you, I mean, again, in most cases it'll be when, because, again, those type of players tend not to be that well handled again. That's then another problem because then they'll take an even longer time to bring up more medium armor. Whereas, again, if you do have it, again, in terms of opportunity and timing, you can then further just bring up more medium armor. That's not to say you should never call in a heavy tank, but generally you'll want some medium armor first before calling in the heavy, so you have something to A, fall back on, but also to ensure you got something to pressure your opponent with a bit more constantly. Plus, it also means your heavy tank has something more actively supporting it, which also tends to be a very good thing. So again, just sort of a small, little ranty discussion here with me on, the matter of, well, oops, actually, the match going there, my apologies. Again, looks a bit more fun when action's happening while I'm talking, so my apologies there. But again, if you're just sort of sitting back there, again, you're just sort of losing a lot of timing and opportunity to your opponent. Again, in timing, I mean, usually, again, 13, 14 minutes, 12, maybe 15, again, depending on how things are going. I mean, you usually want a medium tank out, unless you've got something really clever going on. It's also why, for example, Wehrmacht Tier 4 just isn't very good, because it represents such a huge timing and opportunity cost. Again, because you have to research all the way up, which again costs a lot of manpower, fuel, but also in terms of time, takes up a lot of time. And then you sort of finally have to build it, which again is more resources and more time, more timing, more opportunity, which again means you usually more time, then of course close the gap, bring up a lot of medium. I'm going for heavy calling tank, because again, if you're going for Tier 4 Wehrmacht, again, that's a lot of time and resources, which basically means delayed outcome there. Which again is also why it's a bit tricky when you're sort of well ahead. It just sort of represents a huge resource sink, which actually ends up being more expensive than then going for a heavy call-in tank. So again, in that sense, that's sort of bit the weakness there with Wehrmacht Tier 4 at the moment. Again, it just represents such a huge cost, not just resource, but sort of timing and opportunity-wise, it generally tends not to be quite worth the cost, in my opinion. So go figure there as well. Just a little commentary there as well. Again, why it's, I mean, generally not very much recommendable going for it. I mean, there'll be a few cases where it'll be really effective, but in many cases, there's just not really much of an advantage to be wrung from it. So I think that sort of largely covers it. Again, why you generally want to go for medium armor rather than just wait for sort of the heavier stuff. Why it's better to just try and press the advantage now rather than wait, for example. So hopefully this is an education. Hopefully this will spur more people onto you actually going for medium armor rather than just sitting and waiting back there for the big tank. Again, I mean, if you want to, again, consider timing and opportunity. Where are you time-wise? Again, I also like 13, 12 minutes, in which case, don't think about calling in a heavy tank even there, you dimwit. And of course, if you're sort of close to the 19, 20 minute mark, you can consider it. But even then, I mean, if things are that grim there, might a medium tank not help you a bit more, but then again, a heavy tank can then help more. But again, consider timing and opportunity. What is the timing, of course, and how much will actually lose? Because again, by waiting and by delaying, you give your opponent, of course, more time to push on, but even just, to bring back, even if, say, you got an advantage, you can risk basically throwing it away because you don't push it now, and again, that's another opportunity cost. And again, give your opponent time to get back on the field and then actually beat you if you're really, really unfortunate. So that's a little something there to consider as well when it comes down to all of these things. And, to hopefully, try and stop doing that in the future. Again, I've seen so many players, so it's a figure to finally get around to making a video and pointing out why it's really silly. So hopefully this has enlightened people. Hopefully this will see more people in actually considering the timing, the opportunity, where they are in the timeline of a match, and whether, it actually makes sense to wait for a heavy tank or if they should just go for some medium armor. In theory, you can also apply, of course, this to sort of going, should I just try and push for more light vehicles when I can, which is also an opportunity, but one which doesn't, really get pushed. Again, consider the timeline. Where am I in the timeline? Am I sort of closer to sort of where medium armor should be hitting? That is 13, 14, 15 minutes, in which case you might want to consider not unless it's something really good, like, say, the AAC, which in packs can do something there. But if again, it's sort of like the 8, 9 minute, you can sort of go in for another light vehicle, you can very much consider bringing up more light armor vehicles and sort of pushing against your opponent with that. So that, of course, also applies there. Again, that also works in that way to try and push for an early advantage. Of course, you then, of course, have to try and push it really good and effectively, and still keep, something in reserve in case things go wrong that way. So there you go again. Hopefully this has been educational. Hopefully this has enlightened you, broadened your horizons, perhaps given you some new thoughts and ideas of how to, like, subscribe, share, and of course comment on it. This is Imperial Dane signing off, and see you another time for another educational video. Cheers.